The history of portraiture is the history of being deemed important.
And the story that it tells is that the person that is featured in the portrait is worthy of honor, dignity, respect, and attention. My name is Rosemarie Garland-Thomson. I'm an English teacher, and I also teach other subjects such as disability studies and bioethics and critical theory.
My name is Riva Lehrer. I am an artist and a writer who lives in Chicago, exploring complex embodiment through the method of portraiture. I make portraits in order to explore what it means to be embodied, especially dealing with stigma.
Riva and I have been colleagues for many years. I had been asking Riva for a long time if she would paint me as the bioethicist that I am.
It is a painting on wood panel. The frame around it was custom ripped and custom constructed. She's a very petite woman. She's got blue eyes, a small nose, very delicate mouth. She's got silver hair that's cut to about chin length and combed to one side. She is sitting against a living room wall wearing a red velvet evening gown. Her expression is kind of questioning, quizzical, a little bit defensive. Behind her on the wall is a black chiffon scarf. Her hands are gorgeous.
My hands are very unusual. One of my arms is shorter than the other one. One hand has 4 fingers, 3 fingers and a thumb. The other hand has 2 fingers and is shaped quite differently from the average hand. Riva and I decided that we wanted the center of interest in the painting to be my hands. Riva thought, let's really load this portrait up with meaning. Let's put a vitrine in your hands, and in that bottle will be floating a fetus that has a similar disability.
If you look at the shape of the scarf, the shape of her dress, it makes kind of a broken triangle, and then the triangle opens up and reverses in the shape of her skirt. In the middle is this glass vitrine, and the composition that I was shooting for is a ruptured hourglass. Fetuses are clocks. At every moment in quote normal fetal development, there is a thing that's supposed to happen day by day, week by week. The clock that was Rosemarie's fetal body didn't conform to the expectant fetal clock. The other level, the hourglass, which is even more important, is that the body that we're born into is going to write so much of the story. Even if she had gone on to be a bioethicist, if she was not a person with a variance, she probably would have approached it differently. So that's the other part of the hourglass, the beginning moment and what opens and closes in that first moment.
Portraiture is a particular genre of representation, and it does the cultural work of meaning making. It says, this person in this portrait is important. So many people with disabilities are dishonored, and the history of living with a disability is sometimes a history of being eliminated, a history of being fixed, a history of being cured, a history of being excluded.
When I was in college as an undergrad, I fell in love with portraiture right away. It took me a long time and multiple classes before I realized I'm seeing no images whatsoever of anyone who was non-normative. Ideas of overcoming are not about community, interdependence, realism, any of it. And those are the kind of images that people would get. Overcoming images, charity images, like look at this poor wretch, won't you give money? Monster images, you know, the villain in the movie. I mean, look at all The villains in the movies, 90% of them have like something with their face, something about how they move, or they're ugly and it signals they're evil. So I wanted to make work about my life.
The work of a traditional portrait can work against that marginalization, if you will, that elimination, that definition of us as people who have lives not worth living. And so these pictures and stories of people with disabilities who have lives worth living is a very significant ethical, moral story to put forward. This is what Riva's portraits do, is that they tell a story of a life worth living.
I started to realize as I was making them that two things were happening. I was changing because I was asking people about their embodiment, and it started to change how I felt about myself. And I became gentler with myself, and I saw myself in context. I also found out that the people sitting for me also found it transformative, and that it changed how they felt about themselves. There was this mutual transformation. The viewer was getting something real. In Rosemarie's case, it was a moment in which she was willing to show her hands. I don't know if we had done that a year earlier, if she would have said yes, but in that moment, she was willing to open up her life in that way, and she was willing to trust me to find a face that would invite people in while still fulfilling what she needed to feel. Most of the time, it's been something that people hold on to as a pleasurable reflection. It's also very weird for people to see themselves in a portrait.
My response to Riva's portrait of me is a complicated one. I think people with disabilities have perhaps a more distinctive kind of challenge in managing how we are perceived, how people think of us, and what happens to us as a result of those perceptions. Part of the dignity management that I've engaged in throughout my life is more or less keeping my hands out of sight. I don't exactly hide them, but I don't bring them forward very much, and I certainly don't look at them myself. Usually, I've spent my time in public or in situations where pictures are being made of me, saying more or less with my body and often with my words, look at my face, look at my mouth, listen to me, don't look at my hands. It was awkward for me and unsettling to see this portrait. So it goes against the kinds of representations of myself, the kind of imaginings of myself that I have. I recognize that that's what we wanted it to do. So it's an unsettling response that I have when I look at it. It's a kind of misrecognition. I look at it and I think, who's that? Whose hands are those? And I think almost everyone has that same sort of response in terms of recognizing themselves in representations. At the same time, I recognize the work that the portrait does. I recognize that this is a dignified person who understands herself as worthy of attention and worthy of respect.
Portraiture is the first place, I think, that a lot of people go looking for a mirror. I mean, it's a mirror for the person posing, but in a larger sense, it's a cultural mirror where people go looking for themselves. And that's the point of all this. First, give the person you're working with a way of seeing themselves that seems true to them. And then take that truth to the people who maybe it starts to open the door for who they need to be.
One of the most difficult things for people with disabilities to navigate beyond the barriers that we face, the material barriers, the attitudinal barriers, is to maintain our dignity. We are stared at often, kept out often, mostly unintentionally. The general assumption is that embryos and fetuses and babies with the kind of body that I have don't have good lives. and we want to tell a very different story. Access to representations of disability are absolutely crucial for people with disabilities. We need to have as many representations of people with disabilities out and about in the world as we possibly can. And they need to come along with a context of respect and authority. Disability is one feature of a life, embedded in relationships, embedded in community, embedded in meaningful work.